The moment Scarlet Veil accidentally caught the attention of New York's most feared Mafia boss during a billionaire dinner party, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. Until that night, Scarlet had spent most of her life invisible. Invisible people survive longer in New York, especially poor ones. At 24, Scarlet balanced two exhausting worlds that never seemed to fit together. During the day, she attended art history lectures at Hudson University, surrounded by wealthy students who treated unpaid internships like hobbies instead of survival. At night, she worked catering events inside Manhattan's most luxurious hotels, serving champagne to people whose watches cost more than her yearly tuition. She learned quickly that rich people rarely look directly at workers. They looked through them. Scarlet came from the kind of Brooklyn neighborhood wealthy politicians only visited during election campaigns. Her mother had died when she was 16, leaving behind medical debt and silence. Since then, Scarlet survived through scholarships, late-night shifts, and stubbornness powerful enough to carry exhaustion like armor. Still, no amount of hard work or race class, or the quiet racism buried beneath elite society smiles. At university, professors praise wealthy students for confidence while calling Scarlet surprisingly articulate. Women from billionaire families complimented her curls like she was some fascinating social experiment instead of another student. Men with old money last names flirted with her privately but ignored her publicly. New York rewarded wealth first, humanity second. That evening, rain covered Manhattan in silver reflections, while black luxury vehicles lined the entrance of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel. Scarlet adjusted her catering uniform nervously before entering the ballroom, carrying trays of crystal glasses. The event itself celebrated nothing meaningful. Officially, it was called a charity dinner supporting international arts foundations. Unofficially, it was where billionaires, politicians, celebrities, and criminal empires exchanged power disguised as elegance. The ballroom glittered beneath enormous chandeliers, while violin music floated softly across marble floors. Women wore diamonds large enough to fund hospitals. Men discussed global markets over $1,000 whiskey like ordinary people discuss weather. Scarlet moved quietly between tables, careful not to attract attention. Then she heard the name, Adrian Moretti. The whispers traveled differently from normal conversations. Lower, tighter. Fear wrapped carefully beneath every syllable. Scarlet noticed it immediately, while servers gathered near the kitchen entrance. That's him near the back table. He owns half the city. No, he owns the people who own the city. I heard a senator disappeared after crossing him. Nobody disappears without Adrian Moretti allowing it. Scarlet glanced subtly toward the private section, overlooking the ballroom. At first, Adrian Moretti did not appear extraordinary. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, without visible jewelry or flashy arrogance. Dark hair, calm posture, emotionless expression. Yet the atmosphere around him felt completely different from everyone else. Politicians laughed too carefully near him. Billionaires measured their words around him. Even armed security guards seemed tense whenever he looked their direction. Power surrounded Adrian Moretti so naturally that he never needed to display it. And somehow that frightened Scarlet more. Beside him sat judges, investors, media executives, and a famous mayor currently leading anti-crime campaigns on television. The hypocrisy almost made Scarlet laugh. The city publicly condemned men like Adrian, while privately building fortunes beside them. One of the older servers leaned closer nervously. "Don't stare at him." Scarlet looked away immediately. "Why?" The woman swallowed hard. Because people who attract Adrian Moretti's attention usually regret it. The warning stayed with Scarlet for the next hour. Unfortunately, disaster only needed seconds. Near midnight, the ballroom atmosphere shifted subtly. Conversations lowered. Security teams repositioned themselves near entrances. Something important was happening. Scarlet approached the private tables carrying expensive red wine, while wealthy investors argued quietly over international shipping contracts. Then someone stepped backward unexpectedly. Her tray tilted, and crimson wine spilled directly across the edge of Adrian Moretti's table. The sound of crystal hitting marble echoed across the ballroom. Silence followed instantly. Complete silence. Scarlet froze. Her pulse stopped so violently it almost hurt. Several politicians moved away from the table immediately, while nearby guests stared in horror. One security guard reached toward his weapon instinctively. Nobody breathed. Scarlett looked down at the spreading wine staining white linen beside Adrian's untouched glass. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. No answer came. Slowly, she forced herself to look up. Adrian Moretti watched her silently. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes studied her with unnerving calm. Scarlett expected anger, humiliation, punishment. Instead, Adrian simply sat there observing her like she had interrupted a thought nobody else could hear. The tension inside the ballroom became unbearable. One wealthy businessman cleared his throat nervously. She should be removed. Another guest muttered something about incompetence. Scarlett felt humiliation burning across her skin. She already knew what these people saw when they looked at her. Poor girl, catering staff, replaceable, a mistake waiting to happen. Then one woman near the table spoke, quietly without hiding her disgust. "These agencies really hire anyone now." The comment landed exactly how intended. Not just class hatred, something uglier. Scarlett lowered her eyes immediately. Years of surviving wealthy environments taught her when silence protected dignity better than reactions did. But Adrian noticed. Scarlett realized at the moment his expression changed slightly. Not anger. Interest. A dangerous kind of curiosity. Finally, Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. "Leave the tray." His voice remained calm enough to terrify everyone nearby. Scarlett obeyed instantly. One of the investors attempted an awkward laugh. Women like this usually don't belong in rooms like these. Another mistake. Adrian turned his attention toward the man carefully. "And men like you," he replied quietly, "usually mistake money for importance." The investor's face lost color immediately. Nobody defended him. Nobody moved. Because suddenly the entire ballroom understood Adrian Moretti wasn't angry about the wine. He was angry about something else entirely. Scarlett stood frozen beside the table, confused by the strange shift unfolding around her. Then came the moment nobody forgot. A heated negotiation restarted between several businessmen discussing port contracts and political investigations threatening international shipments. Voices sharpened carefully beneath fake smiles. Scarlett tried stepping away quietly. Before she could move, Adrian reached toward her wrist. The contact sent visible shock through nearby guests. Without warning, Adrian pulled Scarlett directly onto his lap. The ballroom stopped functioning. No music, no conversation, nothing. Scarlett's entire body stiffened instantly from shock. She could feel every pair of eyes staring at her now. Politicians looked horrified. Businessmen looked deeply uncomfortable. One woman nearly dropped her champagne glass entirely. But Adrian remained calm. One arm rested loosely around Scarlett's waist while he continued discussing million-dollar contracts like nothing unusual happened. Scarlett couldn't understand what was happening. Her breathing turned uneven. Humiliation mixed strangely with confusion. And beneath both emotions lurked something even more dangerous. Curiosity. Because nobody around Adrian Moretti looked shocked that he touched women. They looked shocked that he touched her. That difference mattered. Scarlett slowly noticed details she missed before. The fear hidden behind forced smiles. The way powerful men avoided challenging Adrian directly. The subtle respect wrapped inside terror. Whenever he spoke, these were men controlling banks, elections, media corporations. Yet they feared Adrian Moretti more than prison or public scandal. One senator's hands visibly trembled while discussing shipment routes with him. A billionaire investor changed his opinion mid-conversation the moment Adrian looked annoyed. Scarlett suddenly understood something important. Power in New York did not belong to politicians. It belonged to the people politicians feared privately. And Adrian Moretti sat at the center of all of it. Meanwhile, Adrian himself remained emotionally unreadable beside her. Scarlett could feel warmth through his suit jacket. Calm, steady breathing. Absolute control. No inappropriate touching. No drunken behavior. In fact, Adrian barely acknowledged her physically after pulling her close, which somehow made the situation far more intense, because it felt intentional, strategic, like he wanted the room uncomfortable. like Scarlet herself had become part of some invisible message only powerful people understood. Then she overheard a nearby businessman whisper nervously, "Why her?" Another answered quietly, "Doesn't matter. If Moretti claims interest, nobody touches her now." Scarlet's stomach tightened instantly. Interest? She tried pulling away subtly. Adrian's hand tightened just enough against her waist to stop her. Not painful. Certain. The gesture sent another ripple of silence through surrounding tables. For the first time that night, Adrian finally looked directly at Scarlet again. His eyes moved slowly across her face, studying bruised exhaustion hidden beneath makeup and professionalism. Scarlet suddenly became aware of how tired she looked, how worn down life had made her recently. And somehow Adrian noticed all of it without asking questions. That frightened her more than anything else, because predators notice weakness instinctively. Yet Adrian's expression showed something stranger, recognition, as if Scarlet reminded him of a memory he could not fully bury. The emotional tension became unbearable. Then Adrian released her calmly and returned attention toward the negotiation table. Scarlet stood immediately, pulse racing violently. Nobody spoke as she stepped away. Nobody even looked directly at her anymore. It felt like the ballroom had silently accepted something irreversible happened. Near the kitchen entrance, servers crowded around Scarlet in disbelief. "What did he say to you? Are you insane? Do you understand who that man is?" Scarlet barely heard them. Her thoughts remained trapped on Adrian's eyes, on the strange way powerful people reacted around him, and on the terrifying realization that he protected her publicly for a reason she did not yet understand. Hours later, as the event finally ended, Scarlet collected empty glasses near the private dining section while security prepared Adrian's departure. That was when she overheard two older businessmen speaking quietly nearby. Neither noticed her standing behind the curtains. "I've known Moretti 15 years, one whispered nervously. And the older man swallowed hard before answering. Adrian Moretti never touches women unless they become important to him. Scarlet felt cold spread slowly through her chest as Adrian Moretti's security convoy disappeared into the rain-covered streets of Manhattan below. Inside Adrian Moretti's penthouse, luxury felt less like wealth and more like a beautifully designed prison. Scarlet Vale had expected danger after the dinner. What she did not expect was silence. The car ride to Manhattan had ended in an underground garage beneath a tower that did not appear on most public maps. No signage, no visible entry for regular residents. Only reinforced steel doors and armed guards who moved with disciplined precision rather than panic. She was no longer treated like catering staff. She was treated like something that required containment. One of the guards opened the elevator without speaking. Scarlet stepped inside hesitantly, her reflection multiplying in mirrored walls as the doors closed. The elevator did not have visible buttons. Instead, it moved upward only after biometric confirmation from someone unseen. Adrian Moretti stood beside her without touching her, but his presence filled the space completely. He looked calm again, too calm, like nothing unusual had happened at the dinner, where an entire ballroom had frozen at the sight of him holding her. Scarlet kept her eyes forward as the elevator rose. Floor after floor passed without stopping. "This isn't necessary," she said quietly. Adrian did not look at her. "It is—" The simplicity of his response made it worse. By the time the doors opened, Scarlet understood she was no longer in a hotel. She was inside a fortress pretending to be a home. The penthouse stretched across multiple levels, like a private world suspended above Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the city skyline in brutal clarity. Helicopters occasionally passed far below, but up here everything felt distant, almost unreal. Luxury surrounded her in ways she had never seen before. Polished stone floors that reflected light, like water. Art pieces that looked ancient and priceless. Walls that shifted subtly depending on lighting conditions, hiding and revealing different textures. But beneath all of it, something felt wrong. Not dangerous in the obvious sense. Controlled. Every hallway was too clean. Every corner too visible. Every movement could be observed from somewhere. Scarlet realized it within minutes. This penthouse was not just designed for comfort. It was designed for surveillance. Hidden cameras were embedded into corners that looked decorative. Mirrors were likely one-way glass. Even the ambient lighting felt engineered to eliminate shadows. Adrian moved through it without hesitation, like someone who had built the cage himself. Staff appeared almost instantly, silent, efficient, careful not to make eye contact with Adrian. They addressed him only when necessary, and even then, their voices carried tension. One mistake here did not mean embarrassment. It meant consequences. Scarlett noticed how they reacted to him. Not respect exactly. Fear refined into obedience. A house manager approached Adrian with a tablet, speaking softly about schedules, security rotations, and guest restrictions. Adrian listened without emotion, then gave a single nod. The manager left immediately. No questions asked. Scarlett stood near the entrance feeling increasingly small. This world did not operate on normal social rules. It operated on something colder. Hierarchy without explanation. Later that evening, she was guided into a guest suite that felt more like a high-end apartment than a room. Still, even here, the same feeling persisted. Too perfect, too monitored, too quiet. When Scarlett opened the curtains, Manhattan stretched endlessly below her like a living map of power and inequality. Somewhere down there, people were struggling to pay rent. Up here, entire floors existed for silence. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A woman entered without waiting for permission. Elegant, controlled, expensively dressed in a way that suggested generational wealth rather than recent success. Victoria Sinclair. She smiled politely, but it never reached her eyes. "So you're the girl from the dinner," she said. Scarlett straightened slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." Victoria glanced around the suite slowly. It's impressive how quickly certain people rise in proximity to power. The tone carried something sharp beneath politeness. Not curiosity. Assessment. Scarlett recognized it immediately. Class judgment disguised as conversation. Victoria walked deeper into the room without invitation, inspecting it like she had ownership of the space. "Adrian does not usually bring guests here," she continued, "especially not unexpected ones." Scarlett felt her chest tighten. "I didn't ask to be here." Victoria finally looked at her directly. "No one does." A pause followed. Then Victoria's smile softened slightly. "But you should understand something important." Scarlett remained silent. "Men like Adrian Moretti don't protect people without reason," Victoria said. "And when they do, it becomes expensive for everyone else." The statement felt less like advice and more like warning. Before Scarlett could respond, Victoria turned toward the door. "One more thing," she added casually. "Don't confuse attention with safety." Then she left. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Over the next days, Scarlett learned the rhythm of the penthouse. Adrian was rarely physically present, but always emotionally present in the environment. He did not speak often. When he did, people listened immediately. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Staff moved around him like orbiting bodies, around a fixed point of gravity. And yet, Scarlett began noticing something strange. Despite his control, Adrian was always aware of her location. If she moved through one section of the penthouse, security subtly shifted elsewhere. If she entered a restricted corridor accidentally, she was redirected before she even realized it was restricted. It was protection, but it was invisible, and that made it unsettling. One afternoon, Scarlett accidentally wandered into a quieter wing of the penthouse while searching for a reading room. The atmosphere changed immediately. The temperature felt colder, the lighting dimmer. Security presence disappeared entirely. At the end of the corridor, a single door stood locked. No signage, no identification, only a biometric scanner beside it. Scarlett hesitated, then heard footsteps behind her. Adrian. He stopped a few feet away. For the first time since the dinner, something unreadable crossed his expression. Not anger, not surprise. Something closer to discomfort. "This section is restricted," he said calmly. Scarlett turned slowly. "I didn't know." A pause. "You were not supposed to find it." That answer stayed in her mind longer than it should have, because it implied intention, not accident. Adrian gestured slightly. "Leave." She did, but the door remained in her thoughts. That night, Victoria appeared again in a different part of the penthouse lounge where elite guests occasionally gathered. Scarlett had not realized how many influential people moved through this space until now. Politicians, investors, media executives, all speaking quietly as if the walls themselves were listening. Victoria stood among them effortlessly, like she belonged to every conversation at once. Scarlett overheard fragments of discussion, markets shifting, political alliances changing, names being erased from financial records. Everything sounded like invisible warfare, and at the center of it, Adrian Moretti's absence was still dominance. One guest leaned toward another. He's becoming unstable since the dinner incident. No, the other replied quietly. He's becoming unpredictable. That girl changed him. Victoria, nearby, smiled faintly at that. Scarlett felt a strange tightening in her stomach. Changed him, as if she had power over a man like Adrian Moretti, as if she had any control over anything happening around her. That night, Adrian returned later than usual. Scarlett was standing near the glass wall overlooking Manhattan when she sensed him enter rather than heard him. "You should not be near that wing," he said. Scarlett turned. "I didn't go inside." A pause, but you stood in front of it. The observation unsettled her. "How do you know that?" Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "I know everything inside this building." The words were not a threat, but they carried weight anyway. Scarlett studied him carefully now. Up close, Adrian did not look like the version of him people feared in public rumors. He looked controlled, tired in a way he refused to show fully. There were faint marks along his knuckles, old injuries that had healed improperly. Scarlett noticed them before she could stop herself. "You fight," she said quietly. Adrian looked at his hand briefly. "It is not fighting," he replied. "It is survival." The answer left space for no further questions. Yet something in his tone shifted slightly, as if he regretted saying even that much. Days passed. Scarlett began noticing patterns she could not ignore. Victoria always arrived after Adrian left. Certain staff avoided specific hallways. Security increased whenever Adrian spent longer periods alone. And always, that lock wing remained untouched. One evening, while passing near a service corridor, Scarlett overheard two staff members speaking in low voices. The memorial room is still sealed. She was the only one he ever... Don't say her name. Silence followed immediately. Scarlett froze. Memorial room. The phrase repeated in her mind like a warning. That night, curiosity overcame caution. Scarlett waited until most of the penthouse fell into its late-night stillness. She moved quietly through the corridors until she reached the restricted wing again. The biometric lock blinked faintly. She hesitated only a moment, then turned away, only to find Adrian standing behind her. No sound, no warning, just presence. His eyes met hers. For the first time, something sharper than calm crossed his face. "You should not be here," he said quietly. Scarlett swallowed. "I heard them talking." A pause. Then softer. "About her." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not anger. Grief carefully contained. He stepped past her and placed his hand on the scanner. The door unlocked. He opened it. Inside was darkness. Then candlelight. Scarlett's breath caught. The room was preserved like time had stopped inside it. Photographs. A dining table set for two. A violin resting untouched. And at the center, a memorial photograph of a woman Scarlett had never seen before. Beautiful, familiar in a way that made Scarlett's chest tighten unexpectedly. Adrian stood in silence beside her, and for the first time she understood something terrifying. This was the only place in the entire penthouse where Adrian Moretti looked peaceful, because it was the only place where he allowed himself to be broken. Scarlett's eyes moved slowly across the room again, then froze. On a second photograph partially hidden beneath others. Her mother, standing beside the same woman, the same memorial woman, connected. Before Scarlett could process it fully, Adrian's voice broke the silence quietly. "You were never supposed to see this." And the door behind them slowly closed on its own. Scarlett Vale thought Adrian Moretti controlled New York. She was wrong. What she discovered next was far more disturbing. Because Adrian Moretti did not sit at the top of the city's power structure. He sat beneath it, and above even him. Someone else had been quietly controlling the people who ruled everything Scarlett had ever feared. The realization began the night after she saw the memorial room. She did not sleep. The image of her mother standing beside that unknown woman kept repeating in her mind like a broken loop. Nothing about it made sense. Yet everything inside her instinctively understood it mattered. By morning, the penthouse felt different, not physically, but emotionally, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the truth she was not ready to understand. Adrian was already gone when she woke, but the atmosphere he left behind was heavier than usual. Victoria Sinclair arrived before noon. This time, she did not pretend politeness. She walked into the penthouse lounge like someone assessing damage after an unseen battle. "You saw it," Victoria said immediately. Scarlett didn't answer. That was enough confirmation. Victoria exhaled slowly. "You were never supposed to be inside that room." Scarlett finally looked at her. Who was she? Victoria hesitated. For the first time, her confidence faltered slightly. That depends on which version of history you believe. The answer made Scarlett's stomach tighten. Before she could press further, Victoria placed a tablet on the table and turned it on. Encrypted files opened instantly. Names, photos, documents, financial transfers. Scarlett stared in silence. "What is this?" Victoria's expression turned colder. The real structure in New York. One by one, files revealed something Scarlett had never seen clearly before. Not just mafia operations, not just political corruption, but a layered system connecting senators, judges, billionaire families, and intelligence contractors into one invisible network. Trafficking routes hidden beneath charity foundations. Political blackmail exchanged through offshore accounts. Missing persons officially labeled as voluntary disappearances. Scarlett felt her breathing change as she scanned the documents. "This is not possible," she whispered. Victoria leaned back slightly. "It has been possible for decades." Then she tapped one file. Scarlett froze. Her mother's name. Attached to classified investigation, records marked terminated. Cold case files tied to federal oversight units that no longer existed publicly. Scarlett's hands trembled slightly. She was investigating this. Victoria nodded once, and she wasn't alone. Another name appeared beside her mother's. The same memorial woman from Adrian's room. Scarlett felt something inside her chest tighten painfully. Both women, connected, both erased from public record, both tied to the same hidden network. Across the room, silence deepened. Victoria's voice softened slightly, but only in tone, not in tension. "Your mother and Isabella Moretti were collecting evidence against families that control global finance. Senators, media empires, even intelligence agencies." Scarlett stared at her. Why would they risk that? Victoria's expression sharpened. Because they believed truth mattered more than survival. A pause. "People like that never last long in this city." The words landed heavily. Scarlett suddenly felt colder than before. Because now the memorial room made sense in a way she didn't want to accept. Adrian wasn't simply mourning someone he loved. He was mourning someone who had been erased for knowing too much. Later that afternoon, Scarlett finally saw Adrian again. He stood near the glass wall overlooking Manhattan, speaking quietly into a secure phone. His voice was controlled, but something beneath it felt strained. "Phase 3 is already in motion." A pause. "No, do not delay collapse protocols." Another pause. Then softer. "Everything must surface." He ended the call and noticed Scarlett watching him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian finally said, "You should not trust Victoria." Scarlett blinked. "That's not an explanation. It is a warning." His tone left no room for argument. Scarlett stepped closer. "Then explain what I saw." Adrian looked away briefly. For the first time, he seemed tired in a way that was not physical. "What you saw is only part of a structure built to survive exposure. That doesn't answer anything." "It answers everything," he replied quietly. The silence between them stretched. Outside, Manhattan moved as if nothing was wrong. Inside, Scarlett felt like she was standing at the edge of something collapsing. That night, everything escalated. News channels began reporting sudden political resignations. Bank accounts tied to major corporations froze simultaneously. Anonymous leaks flooded media outlets exposing judges, senators, and international business leaders. The empire was not just unstable. It was being dismantled from inside. Scarlett watched the headlines in disbelief. "This is Adrian," she whispered. But something felt off. Too coordinated. Too precise. Like someone had planned every collapse years in advance. Victoria appeared again late that night. This time, her tone carried satisfaction. "He's finally doing it," she said. Scarlett turned sharply. "Doing what?" Victoria smiled faintly, ending what his family started. The statement landed like ice. Scarlett realizing that Adrian's empire had never been built for power alone. It had been built for control. Control over secrets, over names, over systems that should have collapsed decades ago. And now, he was letting it all fall. On purpose. But why? The answer came in fragments over the next hours. Security movements increased inside the penthouse. Encrypted servers were relocated. Staff were quietly dismissed and replaced. Adrian was preparing for something final, something irreversible. Scarlett finally confronted him that night in a private corridor. "You're destroying everything," she said. Adrian didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then, "Because the system that built this empire is the same system that killed her." Scarlett felt her breath stop. Her mother. The words connected too easily now. Too painfully. "You're not just exposing corruption," she whispered. Adrian's silence confirmed it. "You're collapsing it." A faint nod. And everyone inside it. Scarlett felt something shift inside her. Fear, grief, and something dangerously close to understanding. Because if Adrian was right, then everything she had been told about justice was incomplete. Not wrong, incomplete. And that made everything harder to hold on to. Over the next days, emotional distance between them changed subtly. Adrian did not become warmer, but he became more present. Not physically, strategically. He ensured Scarlett was never alone in vulnerable moments. He redirected threats before she ever saw them. He erased risks she never knew existed. But he never explained why she mattered. That silence created something deeper than fear. Connection built through uncertainty. Meanwhile, Victoria's influence grew outside the penthouse. Media narratives began shifting. Scarlett's name appeared in headlines again, not as a victim, but as a figure connected to destabilizing elite networks. Online commentators accused her of manipulation. Anonymous elites began calling her a system disruptor. Class hatred resurfaced publicly. The same invisible racism Scarlett had always felt now became visible on national platforms. She was no longer ignored. She was targeted. One evening, Scarlett returned to her room to find it searched. Not violently. Professionally. Files were gone. Personal items rearranged. Someone had been looking for something specific. She already knew what. Her mother's research. And possibly the evidence Adrian was using to destroy the network. That night, Adrian appeared at her doorway. For a moment, he simply observed the room. Then his expression hardened slightly. "They are accelerating." "Who?" "Everyone who benefits from silence." Scarlett swallowed. "Am I next?" A pause. No. The answer came too quickly. Too certain. And somehow that frightened her more. Because it meant Adrian had already decided her position in all of this, not as a target, but as something else entirely. Something protected, something chosen, something dangerous to remove. That realization stayed with Scarlett as she followed him later into the penthouse archive room, a restricted space she had never been allowed to enter before. Rows of servers, physical files, secure intelligence boards, and at the center, a wall of names. Politicians, judges, business empires, media conglomerates, all connected through hidden financial pathways. At the bottom of the structure, one line repeated across multiple records. Untraceable funding. Family line inheritance program. Scarlett felt her chest tighten. "What is that?" Adrian stood beside her, the method by which corruption sustains itself. A pause. And the reason your mother was killed. Silence swallowed the room. Then Scarlett saw something else. A file marked with her mother's final investigation notes. Attached below it, an order authorization, official seal, signed. Her breath stopped completely as she read the name. Not Adrian Moretti, not a rival mafia family, but something far more powerful. A hidden governing authority embedded within the system itself. The kind of power that never appeared in headlines, never faced consequences, never disappeared. Scarlett stepped back slowly, heart pounding. "This isn't just crime," she whispered. Adrian looked at her quietly. "No, it's architecture." The truth settled between them like something irreversible. Then Scarlett noticed a final document open on the screen, a recorded directive, final operation authorization, and beneath it, a confirmation signature connected directly to her mother's death, issued from inside Adrian Moretti's own empire structure. Scarlett froze completely, because everything she thought she understood about Adrian, about protection, about control, about revenge, was about to collapse into something far more terrifying. And behind her, the system began quietly locking the archive doors. The moment New York's underworld realized Adrian Moretti would protect Scarlet Vale at any cost, her death became profitable. It did not happen all at once. It spread quietly, like a rumor that learned how to survive. At first, it was subtle shifts in tone across elite conversations. Then came missing names from financial circles. Then warnings disguised as casual advice. Scarlet Vale had gone from invisible catering staff to the most expensive liability in the city, and she felt it everywhere outside the penthouse. Manhattan no longer looked like a city. It looked like an organized system reacting to her existence. News networks that once ignored her suddenly began circling her name without directly mentioning her. Anonymous headlines appeared suggesting foreign interference and unidentified influence tied to elite destabilization events. Scarlett saw her own image once on a blurred broadcast clip. No explanation, only speculation. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere changed first among staff. Security rotations doubled overnight. Doors that were once open became biometric locked. Whispers moved through corridors like nervous electricity. "She's the reason everything is shifting." No, it's in protecting her. That's worse. Because everyone understood what Adrian Moretti represented. Control. And now that control had a target. Scarlett stopped going into public spaces of the building unless escorted. Even then, she felt watched. Not by cameras. By intention. Victoria Sinclair returned in public view first. Not physically, but socially. Scarlett began seeing her influence everywhere. Elite charity events, closed-door interviews, private gatherings where power changed hands without official record. And every time Victoria appeared, Scarlett's name followed indirectly. Carefully phrased accusations. Rumors designed to travel faster than truth. She's destabilizing elite partnerships. She's involved in Moretti's internal restructuring. No one rises from nothing without assistance like that. The language was intentional. It never called Scarlett powerful. It called her suspicious, dangerous, unworthy of proximity to men like Adrian. At a private gala attended by Manhattan's upper circle, Scarlett was invited under false pretenses. She should have refused. But refusal in this world was not always safe. The moment she entered, conversations paused in subtle synchronization, not silence, evaluation. Women in diamond-studded gowns looked at her like she was a stain on architecture. Men in tailored suits measured her presence like a risk assessment. One woman leaned toward another. "That's her." "Yes, she looks ordinary." The word was meant to diminish, but it landed differently inside Scarlett. Ordinary, not powerful, not wealthy, not untouchable. And yet she had become the center of attention in a room designed for people who believe they controlled attention itself. A wealthy investor approached her briefly. "You should leave the city," he said softly. Scarlett blinked. "Why would I do that?" His expression tightened. "Because men like Moretti don't stay stable when they become attached." That was the first time Scarlett understood how they were framing her, not as a victim, but as a disruption, a variable in a system that preferred predictability. Meanwhile, violence outside the penthouse began escalating in invisible ways. Rival organizations moved in coordinated silence. Financial assets tied to Moretti-controlled networks were attacked simultaneously across 3 continents. Federal agencies increased surveillance operations, but never fully intervened. Something about the situation made official systems hesitate, as if they were waiting for permission. Inside the penthouse, Adrian became more present without becoming more accessible. Scarlett noticed him everywhere, not physically. Strategically, if she moved, routes changed subtly around her. If she paused near windows, security patterns adjusted. If she showed signs of emotional distress, staff were redirected to reduce exposure. It was protection, but it was also surveillance disguised as care, and it made Scarlett increasingly aware of one unsettling truth. Adrian Moretti was not just keeping her safe. He was integrating her into his system. One evening, Scarlett found him standing alone in the glass-walled observation corridor overlooking Manhattan. He did not turn when she approached. "You are being watched outside," he said calmly. "I already know," she replied. A pause. "Inside as well," he added. Scarlett frowned. "By who?" Adrian's gaze remained fixed on the city. "Everyone who benefits from your disappearance." The words were not dramatic. They were factual, and that made them heavier. Scarlett stepped closer. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know. That doesn't change anything." For the first time, Adrian turned toward her fully. His expression was controlled, but something beneath it was different now. Not softness, not weakness. Focus sharpened into something almost personal. "It already changed everything," he said. Silence followed. Outside, Manhattan lights flickered across glass like distant constellations. Inside, Scarlett felt something shifting between them again. Not romance, not trust, something far more unstable. Dependency built through proximity to danger, the kind that could not be reversed easily. Later that night, federal pressure increased publicly. Investigations that had been quietly closing around criminal networks suddenly accelerated, then abruptly stalled again. It felt inconsistent, artificial, like someone was controlling the pace of exposure itself. Scarlett overheard a conversation between 2 security personnel in the penthouse corridor. Federal teams backed off again. That's not normal. Nothing about this is normal. They're scared of what Moretti might release if pushed too far. Scarlett felt cold at the implication. Blackmail did not seem like protection. It seemed like leverage, a system balanced on mutual destruction. That night, Victoria reappeared through indirect channels again, this time through media presence. A televised interview broadcast across elite networks. Her words were carefully chosen, measured, dangerous. "She represents instability in already fragile power structures," Victoria said calmly. "And instability is something powerful systems correct." Scarlett watched from the penthouse lounge as reporters nodded in agreement. No one questioned the framing, because in this world, narratives did not require truth, only repetition. Later, Scarlett attempted to step outside, briefly onto a private terrace. Security immediately followed, not aggressively, but firmly, restricted. One guard said, "I just need air," Scarlett replied. "No external exposure until clearance is confirmed." Clearance, as if she were data, not a person. She stepped back inside without resistance. Resistance, she was learning, was often recorded, and recorded things were controlled. That night, Adrian returned earlier than usual. Scarlett was sitting near the glass wall. When he entered, he noticed her immediately. "You are being targeted more frequently," he said. "That's obvious." A pause. "Not only by enemies." Scarlett looked at him. "What does that mean?" Adrian's expression tightened slightly. "By systems that require you to remain unstable." The sentence lingered. Scarlett frowned. "I don't understand." "You are not the objective," he said quietly. "You are the trigger." That realization unsettled her more than anything so far, because it meant her existence was not valuable on its own. It was valuable in reaction. She was a catalyst, not a center, and catalysts were usually consumed. Days passed with increasing tension. Scarlett began noticing changes in Adrian's behavior that even staff avoided acknowledging. He was quieter, but more attentive, not emotionally expressive, but precise, as if tracking every possible threat before it reached her. One evening, he stopped her before she entered a restricted hallway. "Do not go there," he said. "I wasn't going to." A pause. "You were thinking about it." Scarlett felt something tighten inside her chest. "How do you know that?" Adrian's answer was simple. "Because I would have." That answer stayed with her longer than expected, because it suggested understanding at a level deeper than observation, not control over her, but recognition of her patterns. And that made him harder to predict, and harder to fear correctly, which was more dangerous. At a private meeting deep within Manhattan's financial district, rival mafia leaders finally confronted Adrian indirectly through intermediaries. Demands were made, not threats. Conditions. "Remove the girl from your proximity," one message stated, or "the balance breaks permanently." Adrian's response was immediate. No. That single refusal changed everything, because now it was no longer about politics. It was personal, and in this world, personal decisions were considered acts of war. Scarlett did not see the response, but she felt its consequences. Security tightened overnight. Unmarked vehicles appeared near the building. Penthouse staff moved faster, spoke less. Even the air felt different, heavier, like something was approaching that could not be avoided. That was when Scarlett finally realized something she'd been avoiding understanding. The underworld was not afraid of Adrian Moretti's violence. It was afraid of his attachment, because violence could be predicted. Attachment could not. And attachment made powerful men irrational, uncontrollable, human, and in systems built on control. Humanity was the greatest threat of all. That night, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Scarlett stood near her bedroom window, watching rain streak down glass when she heard it. A sound sharper than thunder, faster than thought. Glass exploded inward in a sudden violent burst. A sniper bullet tore through the window, embedding itself into the wall behind her as wind and rain rushed into the room. Scarlett stumbled backward, breath caught in shock as alarms across the penthouse immediately erupted into chaos. And in the distance, through the shattered skyline, emergency lights began converging on the tower from every direction at once. The second Adrian Moretti reached for Scarlett Vale's hand during the charity dinner, every powerful person in the ballroom realized war had already begun. Not announced, not negotiated, recognized. The Hawthorne Grand Hotel had been redesigned for nights like this, where billionaires pretended to celebrate philanthropy while silently restructuring global influence over crystal glasses and controlled smiles. Scarlett should not have been there. She knew it from the moment she stepped inside. This event was larger than the first dinner, more secure, more politically layered, more dangerous, because now everyone knew who she was. The girl from the dinner. The girl Adrian Moretti had publicly protected, and the girl the underworld had quietly decided was a liability. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers reflected off polished marble like frozen lightning. Conversations were careful, rehearsed, and deliberately fragmented into harmless fragments of wealth and diplomacy. But beneath it, something else was happening. A psychological shift moving through the room, like an invisible infection. Adrian Moretti sat at the center table again, but this time he was not silent, and that alone changed the atmosphere. Scarlett stood near the edge of the ballroom, assigned no official role, but escorted anyway. She had learned by now that proximity to Adrian came with surveillance disguised as etiquette. Victoria Sinclair was already inside the room before her arrival. Of course she was. Victoria never entered spaces. She positioned herself within them, from a raised balcony overlooking the ballroom. She observed everything like a strategist studying a battlefield. Below, politicians laughed too loudly. Media executives adjusted narratives in real time. Billionaires exchanged coded phrases that sounded like casual conversation, but functioned like instructions. And at the far end of the room, Damian Cross stood among federal representatives. Not aligned, not loyal, watching both sides as if waiting for one to fail first. Damian Cross had always operated in the space between law and collapse. Tonight, he looked less like an investigator and more like a man managing consequences he had already predicted. Scarlett noticed him watching Adrian, not with hatred, with calculation, like someone trying to determine how far a controlled fire could spread before it became uncontrollable. The first sign of instability came from a minor disagreement between two corporate families over maritime contracts. Then another dispute followed. Then another, small fractures forming inside a structure that had once appeared stable. Scarlett felt it before she understood it. The ballroom was being destabilized on purpose, not through violence, through precision. Every conversation was being guided toward conflict, every alliance subtly questioned, every confidence quietly eroded. Psychological warfare was no longer hidden. It was architecture. Victoria Sinclair raised her glass slightly from the balcony, a signal, barely noticeable. But several guests reacted instantly, and that was enough. Across the room, one senator's expression tightened as he received a discreet message. A billionaire investor paused mid-sentence, recalculating risk. A media executive began typing urgently under the table. Information was being weaponized in real time. Then Adrian stood. The entire ballroom responded instinctively. Silence fell immediately, not because he demanded it, because presence alone required it. Scarlett watched him carefully. There was something different tonight, not in control. Control had always defined him, but in restraint, as if something inside him was being pulled toward breaking point. Adrian stepped forward slightly. "I am ending negotiations," he said calmly. No one spoke. The statement alone altered the structure of the room. Damian Cross shifted subtly in the background. Victoria did not move. Scarlett felt tension rise sharply inside her chest. Ending negotiations was not a statement. It was a rupture. One investor finally spoke cautiously. That would destabilize multiple international agreements. Adrian looked at him, and the single word carried no emotion, only consequence. The investor hesitated, because there was no correct answer. Scarlett realized then what was happening. Adrian was not participating in the system tonight. He was withdrawing from it. And systems built on dependency reacted violently to withdrawal. Rival leaders began exchanging sharp glances. Hidden alliances activated. Security personnel adjusted positions subtly. Weapons were not visible, but everyone understood they existed. Scarlett moved slightly closer to Adrian without thinking. That small movement changed something in the room. Several observers noticed immediately. Interest shifted. Attention sharpened. She was no longer background presence. She was part of the equation. Adrian's gaze flickered toward her briefly. That was all, but it was enough. Because for the first time that night, something unreadable crossed his face. Not calculation, not strategy. Emotion, contained, but present. Damian Cross noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. Victoria's smile faded a fraction. The system was beginning to misalign. Then a second wave of disruption hit. A coordinated digital breach hit financial servers tied to multiple attendees. Live transaction freezes spread across offshore accounts. Emergency alerts began appearing on secure devices throughout the ballroom. Someone was moving against everyone simultaneously. Not one faction. Multiple. The room shifted from political tension to survival instinct. And in survival environments, alliances dissolved instantly. Scarlett felt it turning. Fear replacing arrogance. Uncertainty replacing dominance. One guest stood abruptly. "We need to leave," he said. Security doors at the far end of the ballroom did not open. A pause followed. Then another attempt. Still locked. Scarlett's stomach tightened. This was not accidental. Adrian's voice cut through the rising tension. "No one leaves yet." The statement did not sound like permission. It sounded like containment. And that was when Scarlett finally understood the shift fully. This was not a dinner anymore. It was a controlled collapse. But controlled by whom? Adrian stepped closer to the central table where multiple power figures sat frozen in realization. For the first time, his composure cracked slightly, not into chaos, into clarity. "You built your influence on systems you never fully understood," he said. No one responded. You use them until you believe you controlled them. His gaze moved across the room slowly. And now you will learn what happens when those systems stop obeying you. Scarlett felt something tighten in her chest, because Adrian did not sound like a man losing control. He sounded like a man executing inevitability. Damien Cross stepped forward slightly. You're triggering a cascade collapse. Adrian looked at him. Yes. A pause. And you knew this would happen, Damien continued. Another pause. Yes. That confirmation changed everything. Scarlett's breath caught slightly, because it meant none of this was reactionary. It was planned. Victoria's voice came from the balcony. Calm but sharper now. You are willing to burn the entire structure. Adrian did not look at her. It already burned, he said quietly. You just built new walls around the ashes. Silence fell again, but heavier now, more final. Scarlett felt emotional confusion rising inside her. Fear, confusion, and something far more dangerous, understanding, because she was beginning to see the shape of Adrian's decisions. They were not random acts of violence or control. They were corrections, and she was becoming part of the correction field. Adrian turned slightly toward her. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the ballroom, and Scarlett felt something shift again. Not romance, not safety, but alignment, like she was standing on the edge of a system recalibrating around her existence. One investor suddenly spoke loudly. This is madness. You are risking everything you built. Adrian answered without hesitation. I never built it for you. The response landed like a rupture, because it confirmed something no one wanted to accept. The empire was never truly for them. It was around them, containing them, managing them. And now it was being dismantled from inside. Scarlett felt her chest tighten as the room began fragmenting emotionally. Rival families began sending silent signals across tables. Private security teams shifted formation. Hidden weapons were subtly repositioned. Everyone was preparing for something inevitable: betrayal, containment failure, or war. Scarlett looked at Adrian again and realized something terrifying. He was not afraid. Not even slightly. But he was no longer fully present in the same emotional reality as everyone else. Like he had already accepted the end of this version of the world and was simply guiding it there. Scarlett moved closer to him instinctively. That movement did not go unnoticed. Several powerful figures tracked it immediately. One whispered, "She is the trigger." Another replied, "No, he is." And that realization spread quietly through the room. The underworld was not reacting to Scarlett. It was reacting to Adrian's attachment to her. Because attachment meant unpredictability, and unpredictability meant collapse. Adrian's hand moved slightly toward Scarlett again, not pulling her, not forcing, just acknowledging proximity. That small gesture changed everything again. Across the room, several security systems flickered. Doors attempted override resets. Signals failed. Emergency protocols activated. Someone had compromised internal infrastructure. Then suddenly, all ballroom doors locked simultaneously. A deep mechanical sound echoed through the hall. Silence followed instantly. Then came movement outside the glass walls. Armed figures surrounded the hotel tower from multiple angles. Scarlett's breath caught sharply as red emergency lights flooded the exterior. And inside the locked ballroom, every powerful person in New York finally understood the truth. They were not attending a dinner anymore. They were inside the beginning of a war that had already been decided. By sunrise, the hotel was burning, and Scarlet Vale finally understood why nobody survives loving a Mafia king. The first explosion did not feel real. It felt like the world blinked wrong. Then the glass walls of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel shook violently as fire tore through the lower floors. The elegant structure that had hosted billionaires, politicians, and silent wars collapsed into chaos within seconds. Sirens were already screaming outside. Inside, the ballroom transformed instantly from controlled tension into survival panic. But it wasn't random. It was coordinated, and it was targeted. Scarlett stumbled backward as the floor vibrated beneath her feet. Security systems failed in waves, lights flickering between emergency red and total darkness. Smoke began creeping through sealed vents like something alive. Adrian Moretti moved before anyone else. Not toward escape, toward control. "Stay behind me," he said sharply. It was not a request. Scarlett barely processed it before another explosion ripped through the upper level of the hotel, sending shockwaves down into the ballroom. Screams erupted as guests rushed toward locked exits. But the exits remained sealed. Someone had locked them from the outside, trapping everyone inside. Damien Cross appeared near the far end of the room, moving through chaos with controlled urgency. He was not panicking. He was calculating. His eyes scanned exits, security patterns, and collapsing structural points. "This is not evacuation failure," he said loudly. "This is containment." Scarlett's stomach dropped. Containment, not rescue, not accident, something worse. Then the violence escalated. Armed figures breached the hotel interior from multiple levels at once. Not uniformed military, not police, rival forces, private contractors, Mafia enforcers, all converging in a coordinated storm. The Empire was not just collapsing, it was being dismantled violently. Scarlett felt Adrian's hand grab her wrist firmly as he pulled her behind a reinforced service barrier. For the first time since she had met him, his expression was no longer calm. It was lethal focus. A staff member nearby tried to run toward the hallway. He didn't make it. A gunshot cracked through the chaos. The sound silenced everything for half a second. Then chaos returned louder. Scarlett froze, breath caught, unable to process the sudden reality of death unfolding in front of her. Adrian did not look away, but his grip on her tightened slightly. Not comforting, anchoring. "Don't move," he said again. Across the room, Victoria Sinclair stood near the upper gallery. She was no longer observing. She was directing. Her calm expression had changed into something colder, something final. Scarlett saw it immediately. Betrayal, not emotional, structural. Victoria raised her phone briefly, and within seconds, new security doors opened for external forces. She was not trapped inside. She had been the access point. Scarlett's breath hitched. "She opened them," Scarlett whispered. Adrian's eyes flicked upward. He saw it too. Something dark passed through his expression. Not surprise. Confirmation. "Of course she did," he said quietly. Damien Cross moved closer, shouting over the noise. "You planned for the scale of collapse. You knew infiltration was active." Adrian didn't deny it. That silence said more than words. Scarlett felt something twist inside her chest. This wasn't just chaos. It was execution of a plan she didn't understand yet. The hotel shook again as another explosion tore through the east wing. Fire spread rapidly, consuming luxury suites, conference halls, and financial meeting rooms where deals had once shaped governments. Everything above them was collapsing into judgment. Scarlett saw injured staff crawling across marble floors, trapped between fire and gunfire. Some of them were people she had seen only hours earlier serving drinks, smiling professionally, invisible in life. Now, they were not invisible. They were dying. Her stomach tightened violently. "This is insane," she whispered. Adrian looked at her briefly. "It is necessary." The answer did not comfort her. It disturbed her, because he was not emotional. He was certain. Another wave of armed attackers entered the ballroom from the upper staircase. Damien Cross reacted instantly, pulling federal agents into defensive formation. But even he looked strained now. Control was slipping on all sides. Scarlett's vision blurred as smoke thickened. She could barely breathe. Adrian pulled her closer without hesitation, guiding her through collapsing pathways toward a secondary exit corridor hidden behind structural panels. Scarlett stumbled behind him, struggling to keep pace. "You knew this would happen," she said through coughing. Adrian did not slow down. "Yes." The single word confirmed everything. Scarlett's mind struggled to keep up. "You let all of this happen." A pause, then quieter. "I ended it." That response made her stop briefly. But another explosion forced her forward again. Damien's voice echoed behind them. "If you complete this collapse, you don't just destroy them. You destroy every system built on top of them." Adrian didn't turn back. "That is the point." Scarlett felt something shift inside her. Fear was no longer the dominant emotion. Confusion was. Because this wasn't survival anymore. It was intention. They moved through a narrow corridor as fire spread behind them, cutting off escape routes. Structural alarms screamed overhead as the hotel began entering full collapse mode. Then Scarlett saw bodies. Not just staff. Security personnel. Some of them marked with internal insignias. Traitors. Executed in controlled precision. Adrian's organization had already begun purging itself inside the chaos. Scarlett's breathing became uneven. "This is a war," she whispered. "No," Adrian replied. A pause. "It's correction." That word stayed with her longer than the fire. Correction. As if everything burning around them was wrongness being removed from reality. They reached a reinforced exit door, but it was already compromised. Flames poured through the edges. Adrian stopped. For the first time, hesitation appeared. Not fear. Calculation adjustment. Scarlett looked at him. Something inside her shifted again, because in that moment, she saw it clearly. He was not trying to survive. He was making sure she did. "Go," he said suddenly. Scarlett shook her head. "No." Adrian turned toward her fully now, and for the first time, something deeper showed through the control. Not softness, not weakness, responsibility. "You are not part of what happens next," he said. Scarlett's voice broke slightly. "I already am." A pause. Then Adrian stepped closer. And for a brief moment, the fire, the screams, the collapsing empire all faded behind his presence. "You were never supposed to be in this world," he said quietly. "Then why am I here?" she asked. Adrian did not answer immediately, because the truth was heavier than anything he had said before. Finally, "Because you're the only thing I could not afford to lose while destroying it." That confession landed harder than any explosion. Before Scarlett could respond, another massive blast shook the structure violently. The corridor collapsed partially. Fire surged forward like a living force. Adrian reacted instantly, pulling Scarlett behind him as debris fell. He pushed her toward an emergency escape tunnel. "Now!" he ordered. Scarlett stumbled into the tunnel as alarms screamed and heat intensified behind her. She turned back, just in time to see Adrian standing at the entrance, holding back collapsing fire and debris long enough for her to pass through. Their eyes met one final time. Something unspoken passed between them. Then another explosion ripped through the structure. The tunnel entrance collapsed violently, and Adrian Moretti disappeared inside the burning hotel. Even after Adrian Moretti vanished in the fire, New York still feared his name, not because he was seen, but because he was not. The absence of confirmation became its own kind of threat. Months passed after the destruction of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, but the city did not heal. It fractured. What had once been a hidden system of control inside elite society collapsed into visible chaos. Rival leaders fought over leftover influence like scavengers circling a fallen structure. Financial networks shifted overnight. Political alliances dissolved. Entire institutions began behaving like they had lost their central nervous system. And through it all, Adrian Moretti remained officially unconfirmed. Dead, missing, or something in between. Scarlett Vale tried to disappear. She failed. At first, she moved quietly through smaller apartments, avoiding media attention, changing locations, reducing contact with anyone connected to her past life. She told herself silence would rebuild stability. But silence never felt peaceful, only temporary, because trauma does not disappear when the world calms down. It waits. It returns in fragments. She saw the hotel fire every time she closed her eyes. She heard collapsing glass in empty rooms. She felt Adrian's last touch like it was still anchored somewhere beneath her skin. Some nights, she woke up convinced she was still inside the burning structure, running through corridors that no longer existed. New York outside continued evolving without her, or more accurately, against her. The Moretti Empire did not collapse cleanly. It shattered into competing fragments. Some factions attempted to preserve what remained of the structure. Others turned on each other immediately. Rival organizations expanded aggressively into the vacuum left behind. Violence became more frequent, but less controlled. It was no longer strategic. It was desperate. Damien Cross, meanwhile, rose in influence faster than anyone expected. Federal agencies that once struggled to contain criminal networks now began aligning with fragmented intelligence sources Damien controlled. He was no longer just an investigator. He had become a regulator of collapse, a man managing the aftermath of something too large to fully acknowledge. Scarlett saw his name appear more frequently in media briefings, always careful, always measured, always positioned as someone stabilizing a broken system. But Scarlett remembered his face in the burning hotel. He had not been trying to stabilize anything. He had been watching the system break, exactly as planned. Then the messages started. At first, they were subtle. A blank envelope left at a temporary residence. A burner phone activated without contact details. A single encrypted file sent to a device she had never publicly registered. No sender, no trace, only patterns. Scarlett did not respond at first, but the messages continued, each one more precise, each one more familiar. Coordinates, numbers, fragment of archived financial data tied to corrupted government contracts, names that should not have existed publicly anymore. Then, one message contained something different. A photograph. Scarlett's mother, alive, standing beside Isabella Moretti inside a building Scarlett did not recognize. Below the image, a single line of code, not a warning, a direction. Scarlett felt her chest tighten violently, because this was not random. Someone was guiding her attention, and only one person had ever communicated in patterns instead of words. Adrian Moretti. But that was impossible, unless everything she believed about his disappearance was incomplete. Scarlett began tracing the messages carefully, not emotionally, structurally. Every clue pointed toward infrastructure that had never been fully mapped publicly. Subterranean systems beneath New York, abandoned transit tunnels, old service routes sealed after construction collapses decades earlier, and at the center of repeated references, an underground cathedral. The name appeared multiple times across corrupted files, not as a place of worship, but as a transfer point, a hidden junction for archival storage, data concealment, and emergency extraction routes used by elite networks when public systems became unstable. Scarlett felt a slow, unsettling realization forming. The cathedral was not symbolic. It was operational. Meanwhile, paranoia returned slowly, not in obvious ways, but in patterns. People looking too long when she passed. Vehicles that matched her movement too precisely. Financial accounts being accessed indirectly. Someone was still monitoring her, or multiple someones were. One evening, Scarlett received a final message. No encryption this time, just coordinates and a timestamp. No explanation, no sender identity, only certainty. She stood in her apartment for a long time staring at the address. Part of her knew she should ignore it, rebuild a normal life, detach completely from everything that had burned her past into ashes. But something deeper prevented that decision. Not hope, not curiosity, recognition. Because beneath everything she had tried to suppress, she missed him. Not the violence, not the control, not the fear, but the strange, unbearable clarity she felt in his presence. A man who never lied about the nature of the world. A man who protected her, while simultaneously destroying everything around him. A man who had vanished inside fire without confirming whether it was escape or sacrifice. And that absence was louder than peace. Scarlett finally moved. Night fell as she followed the coordinates into the lower districts of New York, where infrastructure aged differently and silence fell heavier. Streetlights became sparse. Buildings older. Air colder. She reached the entrance marked in the message just after midnight. An abandoned subway access point sealed with reinforced metal and warning signage that had faded over years of neglect. The lock was already open, as if expecting her. Scarlett hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The staircase descended into darkness that swallowed sound. The deeper she went, the more the city above disappeared, until there was only silence and history. The underground tunnel stretched farther than she expected, reinforced in sections that should not have existed according to public records. Old architectural markers confirmed something disturbing. This was not forgotten infrastructure. It was preserved. She followed the faint light sources deeper until she reached a vast, open chamber beneath the city. And there, she stopped completely. An underground cathedral. Not destroyed. Not abandoned. Maintained. Candles illuminated stone arches that curved into impossible silence. The structure was both ancient and deliberately sustained, like something preserved for a purpose that outlived its original meaning. Scarlet stepped forward slowly. Her heartbeat felt too loud. Then she saw movement in the shadows. At first, she thought it was memory, or exhaustion, or grief manifesting in form. But then the figure stepped slightly into dim light, and everything inside her stopped. Adrian Moretti stood in the darkness of the underground cathedral beneath New York, alive. The final time Adrian Moretti reached for Scarlet Veil's hand happened moments before the entire empire collapsed forever. The underground cathedral beneath New York did not feel like a place built for endings. It felt like a place that had been waiting for one. Candles flickered against ancient stone walls as the city above trembled under the weight of simultaneous collapse. Somewhere far overhead, sirens merged into a continuous soundscape of institutional failure. Federal systems were no longer responding in coordination. Financial networks were breaking apart in real time. Political structures that had survived decades of hidden manipulation were finally exposed to daylight. And beneath all of it, Adrian Moretti stood still. Scarlet remained frozen a few steps away from him, unable to reconcile the image in front of her with everything she had been told. He was alive, but not unchanged. Something in him had shifted beyond recognition. The calm control that once defined him now felt stripped away, replaced by something quieter and more final. Acceptance, not surrender. Decision. Behind them, the cathedral corridors echoed with distant movement. Federal forces were closing in from multiple entry points. Rival remnants of the shattered empire were converging as well, each trying to secure whatever remained of the hidden archive systems buried beneath the city. The war had not ended in the hotel. It had moved underground. Damian Cross emerged first to the northern corridor, flanked by armed federal units. His expression was no longer strategic or distant. It carried exhaustion now, like a man who had spent too long standing inside consequences he helped shape. "You cannot stabilize this anymore," Damian called out. His voice echoed across the stone chamber. "You've already exposed too much." Adrian did not turn immediately. When he finally did, his expression carried something Scarlet had never seen before. Not anger, not calculation. Clarity. "It was never stable," Adrian replied. A pause. "You only believed it was." From the opposite side of the cathedral, Victoria Sinclair appeared through a fractured archway, her presence still composed but no longer untouchable. The systems she once controlled were collapsing faster than she could redirect. Her gaze locked onto Scarlet first, then Adrian, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, then frustration. "You're destroying centuries of structure," Victoria said sharply. "Do you understand what replaces this when it falls?" Adrian's voice remained steady. Something honest. That word changed the atmosphere. Honest. As if such a concept had been absent from everything above ground for too long to matter anymore. Scarlet slowly stepped closer to Adrian, her movements uncertain, but no longer fearful in the same way as before. Fear had changed shape over time. It was no longer about him. It was about everything surrounding him. "What is this place?" she asked quietly. Her voice barely carried across the chamber. Adrian finally looked at her fully, and for the first time since she had known him, there was no distance behind his expression, only exhaustion layered with something deeper. "Regret. This is where it ends," he said. Silence followed. Then he added, "and where it should have begun differently." The statement carried weight Scarlet did not immediately understand, until Damian spoke again. "The financial records you released," he said toward Adrian, "they didn't just expose corruption. They exposed the entire dependency structure holding multiple governments together." A pause. "You didn't destabilize crime. You destabilized control itself." Adrian did not deny it, because that was the point. Across the chamber, armored movement intensified. Federal units advanced cautiously through narrow passages. Rival groups clashed intermittently in the distance, their alliances collapsing faster then they could adapt. The underground cathedral had become a convergence point for every surviving power structure that still believed it had claim over the old world. And it was failing. Scarlet felt it now, not just in sound, but in atmosphere. Something irreversible was happening. Victoria's voice softened slightly, but not with empathy, with calculation. You could have ruled all of this, she said to Adrian. You had access to everything. Adrian finally turned toward her. I never wanted it. A pause. I wanted it gone. The words landed differently than expected, because they were not emotional. They were final. Damien took a step forward. And Scarlet, he asked, was she part of that plan too? For the first time, Adrian hesitated. That hesitation changed everything in the room. Scarlet felt it immediately, because hesitation meant truth without structure. Adrian looked at her again, and something inside him softened, not into weakness, but into memory. She was never part of the system, he said quietly. She was the only thing inside it that didn't belong. The admission shifted the emotional weight of the entire cathedral. Scarlet's breath caught slightly, because it reframed everything she had experienced, not as selection, but as disruption, not as control, but as protection that never asked permission. Victoria let out a short, humorless breath. You think attachment justifies collapse? Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to Scarlet, not touching her yet, just closer. And when he spoke, his voice carried something almost unrecognizable from a man who once controlled entire rooms with silence. She was the first person who made me want to stop living like a monster. The confession did not echo like power. It echoed like release. Scarlet felt something break inside her chest. Not pain exactly, but understanding forming too late to be simple. Everything he had done, every control collapse, every hidden protection, every calculated destruction, was not about dominance. It was about ending something that had already poisoned everything above them. Damien's voice turned sharper. You're still responsible for what dies because of this. Adrian nodded once. I know. No denial. No defense. Only acceptance. That was when the cathedral trembled violently. Not metaphorically. Structurally. Explosions from above-ground systems had finally reached deeper support layers. The entire underground network was beginning to destabilize. Time was no longer negotiable. Scarlet looked around as dust fell from the ceiling in slow motion. What happens now? She asked. Adrian turned slightly toward the central vault behind them. Now it finishes. Victoria stepped forward urgently. You're not walking away from this. Adrian's response was immediate. I never intended to. That statement silenced her completely, because it confirmed what no one wanted to accept. Adrian Moretti was not trying to survive the system. He was concluding it, permanently. Damien raised his weapon slightly, not aimed yet, but ready. You understand what comes after this? He asked. Adrian looked at him. Yes. And you still proceed. A pause. Yes. Scarlet stepped forward again, this time closer to Adrian than before. Her voice was quieter now. Then what am I supposed to do after this? That question changed the tone of everything. Adrian finally turned fully toward her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, live outside what I destroyed. Scarlet's throat tightened. That doesn't feel possible. It is, he said. A pause. If you stop believing the system owns the shape of your life. That answer carried something heavier than instruction. It carried exit. Behind them, alarms from collapsing systems echoed through tunnels. Security grids failing. Vault systems unlocking automatically. Encrypted records beginning to transmit across global networks. Everything that had been hidden was now irreversible. Victoria suddenly moved toward an exit corridor, not fleeing, redirecting, calculating survival through adaptation. Damien watched her go, but did not stop her, because stopping her no longer mattered. The structure itself was dissolving. Scarlet turned back toward Adrian, and for the first time, she understood the full scale of what he had done. Not just exposing corruption, not just collapsing power networks, but removing the architecture that allowed hidden control to survive unnoticed. A system so old it had stopped appearing as evil and started appearing as normal. Sirens above intensified. Federal units were closing in on the cathedral from multiple directions, but the space around Scarlet and Adrian felt strangely still, like the world was finishing its final rotation. Adrian extended his hand toward her, not commanding, not forcing, just offering, the same gesture that had once defined everything between them. Scarlet hesitated, because she understood now that taking it meant accepting the reality of everything that followed. Not safety, not stability, but truth. She reached forward slowly, and the moment their hands touched, the entire cathedral shook violently again. Structural collapse began accelerating. Damien shouted something over the noise, but it was lost in the breaking stone and rising alarms. Adrian tightened his grip on Scarlet's hand briefly, not holding her back, anchoring her through collapse. Then he stepped back slightly. Scarlet's eyes widened. No! But he was already moving, toward the central vault system, toward the final trigger point. Adrian! She called out. He did not turn fully, only enough for her to see his expression one last time. Not fear, not regret, only certainty. Then the detonations began. Fire erupted through lower cathedral layers as systems triggered their final collapse protocols. The underground structure began folding inward on itself in controlled destruction. Scarlet was pulled backward by emergency forces as Damien grabbed her arm urgently. We have to move now. But she resisted for half a second, just enough to see Adrian standing alone near the collapsing vault entrance as fire and stone converged around him. Their eyes met one final time. No words, only recognition. Then the structure gave way completely. The cathedral vanished into fire and collapse as emergency forces dragged Scarlet to a final exit tunnel into blinding surface light. Above ground, Federal agents immediately surrounded the sealed ruins as the entire underground system collapsed beneath New York. The empire did not just fall. It disappeared. Weeks later, official reports confirmed widespread exposure of political corruption networks, financial manipulation systems, and international blackmail structures tied to multiple governments. Resignations followed. Arrests followed. Silence followed that was louder than any of it. But one detail never resolved. Among all recovered remains, all documented identities, all verified casualties, Adrian Moretti's body was never found. And as Scarlet stood alone near the sealed cathedral site months later, she finally understood something that no official report could explain. Some endings were not recoveries. They were absences that refused to close. And somewhere beneath that silence, the story was not finished.